Hey family, welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. Today I'm going to be discussing with you a court case that's currently going on involving a former Dallas Police Department officer by the name of Christopher Hess. Christopher Hess was a 10-year veteran officer on the Dallas Police Department back on January 18th, 2017. And so finally, 3 long years later, the family of 21-year-old Genevive Dawes is going to have their day in court. Now, what happened is that there was a report of a stolen vehicle, and officers responded about 1 o'clock in the morning. Inside this reportedly stolen vehicle was 21-year-old Genevieve and her boyfriend. They were asleep, and they were awakened to police yelling and screaming and flashing lights. And we're going to see what happened in that video, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the tactics and everything that led up to this officer, Christopher Hess, and a charge of aggravated assault by a public servant that's currently going on. Here's the video.
Hands up! Shit.
Let me see her!
Watch out.
After 143, check out Major
Move.
2403 North Washington. Black male refusing to stay away from property. On a black shirt, black pants with red on the
Silence!
carrying a backpack.
Back up.
Heavy and random like security, very uniform and armed.
Don't move!
Hands up!
Shots fired! 4700 east side, back parking lot!
Cover code 3 after 140, can you hit that way? 4700 east side, shots fired.
Stop me an ambulance.
Show us your hands!
10-4.
Let me see the hands! Hands up!
Hands up!
Open the door from the outside!
35
Reset, open the door! Alpha 114, they rammed the squad car twice.
Hey, Dad, watch yourself, man. Hey, fall back.
Open the door from the outside! Open the door from the outside! Open the door from the outside! You guys okay? Everybody all right? Open the door! Step out, get on your knees! Step out, get on your knees!
Now! Down, police!
What? On your knees towards me!
After 114.
Go ahead, we're getting one out of the car. Give me a second. Work on your knees towards me! Keep moving! Keep moving! Who else is in the car? Who else? Keep moving! Move towards me! Move towards me! Keep coming! Keep coming! Keep coming! Keep coming! Hands on your head, do not fucking move. You understand me? Do not move! Car's clear.
43, we're just off code 6.
Just keep a gun on her till the ambulance gets here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Put your arms out to the side.
Do you see any weapon? There's an ambulance coming. Hey, Hey, somebody go out there and guide the ambulance in. Move that squad car so they can get up here.
Cuffs, yes?
Yeah, cuffs. Do you see any weapons? There's a holster. Heads up, there's a holster, Aaron. Be careful. I'm going to ask you one time, are there any weapons in this car?
Hey, do you have any weapons on you?
Huh? Yes?
Morning, we start DFR that way.
He's got one.
10-4.
I'm waiting for the ambulance. Doing Q through the throat.
Okay.
Which arm?
Rescue 19's en route.
We're in the back. We're in the back.
Alice should be guiding them in.
Yeah, that's where you guys at.
We're in the back parking lot, Gary, 4700 East Side. Who was back here? Yeah, we're all good.
How can we move?
There's a wallet.
No one to make it out with them.
Anybody? So we're good.
We're good on cover. We can slow everybody down. I just need the ambulance.
10-4. 43, we're out.
Where's
And
the
514.
I don't know.
Unit, we'll read this to code 1 and 514.
Find me my ambulance. I got one low sick.
One low sick, 10-4, one suspect.
Huh?
We have 2 suspects, 1 low sick.
I'm gonna need a second ambulance also. I got 2 injured.
Leave 102. 102. As soon as I get logged on, I'll be en route.
The ambulance is on its way. There's a holster in here. I don't know, Aaron.
okay out there?
I'm not patted him down. I have not patted him
Yes, all officers are okay.
Hey, y'all patting him down. Make sure, cause step to the side, Zach. All right. Let's actually out in the front where I can see you.
Alpha 135, we're out. 10.
There you go. Right there's good. Right there's good.
For 124, will you add us to that? We're almost code 6. All right, 10-4.
I'm just not putting this away until I make sure there's no fucking gun in there, because the holster was right there in the seat.
I don't want to pump the blood out of her.
No, I know. We have a supervisor?
So here's the deal. 41-year-old, 10-year veteran Christopher Hess, former Dallas Police Department officer, is now trying to justify something that should have never occurred. I have been providing analysis on this court case on the Law and Crime Network, as I often do, and what the defense is trying to say in this case, where he's been charged with aggravated assault by a public servant being he's a police officer at the time, was that this young woman, Genevive, was responsible for her own death. You know, they like to victim blame. They like to dirty them up and talk about things in your past to influence a jury into believing that somehow you deserved to die. And so what the officer said is that, you know, she backed up and rammed is the word he used. She rammed his car twice. You could see on the video her car moved but very slowly, and that yes, she did strike a police officer vehicle. But here's the deal. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Genevieve had just bought that car about a month ago, according to her mom, and unbeknownst to her, but we now know, the car had been reported stolen. So she's a young girl, 21 years old. Maybe somebody bumped her head and she bought a car not knowing that it was stolen. She was living in the car. She was sleeping in the car. 1 o'clock in the morning. Neighbor sees the car, call. Now she knows that she's sleeping in it. She knows she's in a parking area where she probably should not be, doesn't live. And so when she was finally awakened, her first mindset seemingly was to start the engine and maybe try to just move the car and get out of there. Not understanding probably that she was in fact surrounded by police cars. And listen, there were several officers on scene, and Hess was one of 2 who actually fired, but he's the only one who's being charged. Now he fired how many rounds? 13 rounds. None of the other officers felt fear, they felt a need, they felt threatened, but his defense is that he fired 13 rounds in the immediate defense of the life of others, his peers, the other officers who were capable of defending themselves because they all had guns, right? Nobody fired except for Hess and one other guy. So that's his story, and he's sticking to it. But listen, there's a lot of reasons why that shooting should not have occurred. And I'll talk about the fact that, the car wasn't stolen later on. They thought it was, but that's why, if sense were common, everyone would have it. They responded to a radio call of a possible stolen vehicle. And sometimes we get information that isn't correct. And that's why you have to use good judgment in addition to everything else that you've learned and been taught as a police officer. You never shoot at a moving vehicle. And the reason that he shot at the vehicle, not because, in my opinion, he thought that someone else's life was in immediate danger, but because he didn't want her to get away, because he didn't want her to drive off. How many times have we seen officers use deadly force because they don't want somebody to give away? Isn't it to get away? Isn't that what happened with Walter Scott when Michael Schlager couldn't catch him and he wound up firing 8 rounds into Walter's back as Walter ran away? Isn't that what happened here in California several months ago when deputy sheriff stopped a young man who was an alleged gun runner? Okay, he was in a vehicle, he was blocked into an apartment complex, and suspects want to get away, so he started the car and tried to back up. Officers didn't want him to back up, didn't want him to drive off, so they wound up shooting like 37 times into his car. That was LA County deputies who shot into the car of this young man 37 times. So here you have Christopher Hess, 13 times he fires into the car for only, as far as I'm concerned, to stop her from fleeing the scene. Aggravated assault by a public servant. And then, on top of all of that, now we know that the car, in fact, wasn't stolen. We now know that the information that the officers received was inaccurate. We now know that they're trying to justify that by using verbiage, rammed my car, to convince a jury that somehow that was reasonable. And the problem I see with this case is that great deference is given to a police officer's version. When an officer says a thing, a jury typically wants to believe it. And so it's going to be, what was in his head, what he says he thought, whether it was real or not. That's what he thought. And it's very difficult to argue what is in someone's head. And so we'll have to see what happens. The trial has just started. I'll probably be providing analysis over the next few days. And when everything is said and done, I'll come back and I'll tell you what, if any, sentence he was given. That's assuming he's convicted, right? Great deference is going to be given to what this officer has to say. The other gentleman in the car, you saw him. He survived the encounter, Mr. Rosales. He was only charged with possession of a handgun because they found out after the fact that he was a felon with a gun in the car, but they knew none of that when they stopped him. And so now it's going to be, this felon and his story versus a police officer. So I will keep you apprised of what's going on, and listen, comply and complain. That's why I say, you don't know what officer is pulling you over. You have to be very careful. This is the second incident that we've seen recently where an officer got involved in a vehicle that they thought was stolen. Remember David Ward in Sonoma County, California, who recovered his stolen vehicle. Sheriff deputies stopped him and then wound up cracking his head on the side of his car and killing him. You got to be very careful. You never know who you're going to get in that grab bag of police officers. When you have an opportunity to comply, do so, complain, survive the police encounter. That's it for now, family. Until next time, be good and be safe. Support Sergeant Dorsey Speaks by visiting my website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com, and purchasing my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate.